There's no reason that this bike had to be added to Grand Theft Auto 5. Now sure, it's a nice thing that we're able to buy, and even though it's extremely overpriced, it is unique. However, the model that came out with the Money Fronts DLC is a different model from the original 2013 version, adding new lights and some other minor changes. However, couldn't have this just been upgrades to the vehicle instead of making an entirely new model? This means that we have two different versions of the police bike in the game files, instead of having one with added customization. And this isn't the only vehicle that falls victim to this fate. So today we're going to talk about 42 vehicles that shouldn't be in GTA 5. The second vehicle I want to talk about is the weaponized Ignis. Now it's great to have a weaponized supercar, but again, couldn't have this just been an upgrade on the regular Ignis? The only difference between the two of them is the added machine gun on top, and that the weaponized version is 50 kilograms heavier. Aside from that, these perform and handle the exact same. So why couldn't we just add the Amani tech and weaponry to the original Ignis? The LS Carmi Jester RR has been a vehicle that everyone's agreed was pointless to add, even when it first came out. At least now it's been changed where you can remove the livery and do some minor changes in the car meet. But let's be honest, it's slower, lighter, and worse than the regular Jester RR. So why couldn't we just have wide body kit modifications in the fender choices for the regular Jester RR? The exact same situation can be said with the brand new LSCM Cheetah Classic, which is just a wide body version of the Cheetah Classic. Again, without any new or different customization. So why couldn't these body mods just be added to the original version for an extended price? On a similar note, the Beater Dukes is a wonderful version of the Dukes, allowing you to have a damaged version of this car, likely so we could mimic Dom's Charger in the Fast and Furious movies. However, again, there's nothing different about this car except for the fact that there's different customization options. So why couldn't these options just be added to the original Dukes retroactively? Now I know what you're thinking, it's hard to add mods to a vehicle after the fact, but that's not true, because Rockstar did this a lot in the past. With vehicles like the Penumbra or the Zentorno or the Sterling GT, they all received new modifications years after their initial releases. Now I'm not sure which of these two trucks shouldn't exist, but the new Walton L35 stock is just a lowered version of the Walton L35. And I feel like these would have benefited more from having the new stock version just be called the Walton, and then have the old version be called the Walton L35 or the Walton Off-Road or something like that, and maybe have it as a Benny's upgrade. This would have made a lot more sense, but instead, since we don't have the option to add lift kits to vehicles, they've added these as two separate vehicles. An added note on this is the new Walton L35 Drift stock version, which is a drift version of the stock vehicle, not a drift mod in the LS car meet. So again, another version of the vehicle that could have been modifications. The other new vehicle that Rockstar added with the recent Money Fronts DLC is the Higgins Heli Tours Maverick, which, as I mentioned in a previous video, is not a new livery on the original Maverick, but instead, it's an entirely new vehicle in the game files. So you can't add the Higgins Heli Tour livery onto a regular Maverick. I even purchased it to try, and it's just not an option. There are also two different vehicles in the game that have way too many versions for what they're worth. And the first off is obviously the Baller. I mean, look at this lineup. We have the old Baller, the new Baller, the Baller LE, the Baller LE LWB, the Baller LE Armored, the Baller LE LWB Armored, the Baller ST, and the Baller STD, which is way too many Ballers. Now, the old one and the original one, that makes sense. And the new ST and STD have better performance and newer looks. But the LE, LWB, LE, LWB, and the Armored versions are completely pointless. These are just slight modifications on a pre-existing vehicle that nobody owns. So instead, we could have just had a Baller, an Armored Baller, maybe a Baller ST, and an Armored Baller STD. Which would still be a lot of versions, but it would cover all the bases for what we currently have in a lot less vehicles. The other vehicle that has way too many models is the Boxville. Now, many people might think the Boxville is just one vehicle that has many different liveries and designs. However, the Post-Op Boxville is separate from the Go Postal Boxville, which is separate from the Humane Labs Boxville, which is separate from the LSDS Boxville, which is separate from the LSDWP Boxville. Some of these have different modifications like roof racks or cones on the front, but when it comes down to it, they're all the same vehicle that could have had slightly different modifications if it weren't for the fact that they're Pegasus vehicles. The Shafter falls into the same boat as the Baller, with the Shafter having 4 different variants, including the Shafter LWB, the Shafter LWB Armored, the Shafter V12, and the Shafter V12 Armored, as well as the Schwarzer, which is a 2-door version, but we won't be touching on that today because it's fine as its own entity. But let's be honest, the long wheelbase Shafter could have just been replaced with the Shafter V12, which we already have, and a Shafter V12 Armored version would have replaced the LWB Armored version. The LWB versions are completely unnecessary, and if you're saying, but I like the look of a longer Shafter, just buy the turreted limo. It's just a Shafter that's been extended into limo form with a turret on top. A prime example of a vehicle that doesn't need to exist is the Cluck & Bell Benson, which is an exact replica in performance, weight, handling, and design as the regular Benson, but instead it has the Cluck & Bell livery on the side. The Benson already has numerous different liveries, so the Cluck & Bell livery would have just been an easy addition onto that vehicle. The clean version of the Journey, aka the Journey 2, was added with the Drug Wars DLC. Now let's be honest, we could have just had the regular Journey with a clean variant. However, given the fact that other vehicles have beater versions, I suppose we can let this one slide. Moving into the aircraft, we have 2 more vehicles that I'm sure many people are going to say have their spot in the game. But that's the Swift Deluxe and the Luxor Deluxe. Now the Swift Deluxe is just a gold version of the regular Swift, and the Luxor Deluxe is just a gold version of the regular Luxor. With these 2 vehicles, it just allowed Rockstar to put a much higher price tag on them for basically no added features, except for drinking champagne in the back and surfing the web. But looking at the Luxor, we also have the Shamal, which is just an identical version of the Luxor with a less privatized feel, having liveries for different air companies within the game. Again, this could have just been liveries added to the Luxor. The Super Velido Carbon is just a carbon version of the regular Super Velido, which again could have just been a livery within the hangar. Although this vehicle may have come out prior to the hangar's release, so perhaps that's why they did it. But either way, it doesn't change anything on the vehicle. They have very similar performance and handling, and roughly the same price, I believe. The last aircraft on this list is the weaponized Kanata, which easily could have been a weaponized upgrade on the regular Kanata, as many aircraft we buy in the game come unweaponized and then require us to add weapons ourselves in the mod shop. These next 2 are probably going to ruffle some feathers, but the XLS Armored really didn't need its own version. The regular XLS could be given a Monitech in today's day and age, and the XLS Armored could be forgotten and removed. And let's be honest, a similar thing could be done for the Kuruma. The regular version of the Kuruma could have had armor options in some type of mod shop. Now I know when this car first came out there wasn't other mod shops in the game. However, I would be interested to see a mod shop just for adding armor plating to vehicles in GTA 6, and this would make these types of vehicles obsolete in the future. The Tornado Rat Rod is another vehicle that easily could have had some modifications on the original Tornado instead of being its own vehicle. For this, you would have had to remove the fenders, the hood, the grille, and everything else on the front end of the vehicle, and we might not have seen the addition of wide tires on the back. However, if that was the only difference that they couldn't make happen based on regular modifications we already see in the game, is that really that much of a loss? A similar vehicle that would be a lot less likely to see this treatment is the Peyote Gasser, which is just a muscly version of the Peyote. However, this would have required some new modifications that we've never seen before in the game, and that likely wouldn't have happened back in the day. But in a future game, again, this could just be modifications to the same vehicle. The last vehicle we're going to talk about that only introduced new modifications is the Roosevelt Valor, which is completely unnecessary. This vehicle was added 1 year after the original Roosevelt, and the original Roosevelt didn't have any customization. So when they released the new version of the Roosevelt Valor, it came with a plethora of modifications. However, why couldn't these modifications just be added to the regular Roosevelt? Why did we need 2 different versions of the vehicle when you could have just had one? And the exact same thing could be said for the JB700 and the JB700W. The JB700 has machine guns you can never get rid of, but the JB700W has machine guns that work that you can choose to remove for a clean version. Why couldn't these modifications just be added to the original JB700? Why did it have to be a new vehicle that costs 4 times more than its original counterpart? The last 10 or so vehicles in this list are all original 2013 vehicles that could have easily just been liveries. Starting off, the Body 801RR doesn't need to exist. They could have just added these liveries to the regular Body 801. The same story can be seen on the Sanchez and the Sanchez livery. The Sanchez livery is an identical replica of the original Sanchez, and they both came out at the same time. But the only difference is that it has liveries, which could have just been an option on the regular Sanchez. The Patrol Dilettante is another emergency vehicle that we still don't have the option to own, despite us almost having every emergency vehicle in the game available for purchase at a ridiculous price. However, this could also just be a livery on the regular Dilettante. Now, I'm sure there'd be some weird unlocking to get it and online if that was the case, but it could have just been a livery from day one. Now, I'm sure a big part of this is that in order for a certain vehicle with a certain livery to spawn, like the Patrol Dilettante at the docks, you need it to be its own version of the vehicle. But I think with Rockstar's knowledge and ability nowadays, this wouldn't be the case. So hopefully we don't see this kind of problem in GTA 6. The next 3 vehicles I'm going to mention have better performances and better handling on the versions that I don't think are necessary. And that's the Pisswasser Dominator, the Buckacherz Stallion, and the Sprunk Buffalo. All of these vehicles are almost identical to the Dominator, Stallion, and Buffalo S. However, the only difference is that they perform slightly better, likely because they are built for racing. That being said, these could have just been liveries and extra engine upgrades on the original vehicles to get that performance out of them. The Smoke on the Water Pony has been in the game since 2013, but was just made available via Career Progress in the Money Fronts DLC. That being said, it's just a different livery of the regular version of the pony, which again has multiple of its own liveries. The part that really bothers me is that we can't own the regular pony. You can find it on the street, but you can't store it in your garage. However, we can own the Smoke on the Water Pony, which is basically identical. So why can't we own the other version now? The McGill-Olsen Bison is completely unnecessary. There's also another version of the Bison that I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but these 2 versions of the Bison are just different variants of the regular Bison for specific companies with specific modifications. Again, this is likely due to spawning issues, but let's be honest, I really hope that this isn't an issue moving forward. The Deludamol Rumpo is just a livery on the original Rumpo, but instead it again was added as its own vehicle. I know I'm nitpicking, and it's like a very small complaint on lots of these vehicles, but I'm just saying it would clear up the 934 vehicles we have in game now. The Daemon, or Demon, I've been corrected on how I pronounce that before, is a unique bike, but there's a Lost MC version of it that I think is completely unnecessary. The exact same thing can be said for the Gang Burrito and the Lost MC Gang Burrito. Both of these vehicles have a Lost MC variant and a regular variant, despite the fact that all the Lost MC variant does is add some logos on the seats or the side of the van. The second class vehicle we have is the Yuga Custom, which was added as a career progress option for the Lamar missions. This is a unique version of the Yuga, and I definitely think it should be in the game. My problem with it is that there's 2 identical versions of the exact same vehicle because they had to add a second version of it to make the Lamar Hunting Pack remix, which makes little to no sense when they could have just used the original model in the game mode. Instead, they had to make a duplicate of it and use the duplicate of it. So there's 2 versions of this vehicle in the game. Why? And the last vehicle that I don't think should be in GTA 5 or GTA 6 or any GTA, or should even exist in the first place, is the Mamba, because I fucking hate that thing.